back to FranklinCovey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. 6 years, nearly 500 episodes taped, where every week on Tuesdays and Fridays, I am honored to interview some of the world's most remarkable creators. This podcast is sponsored by FranklinCovey, known to many around the world as the world's most trusted leadership firm, and founded more than 4 decades ago, in part by Stephen Covey. You, of course, know him as the author of the incomparably impactful book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. My own association with the firm is nearly 3 decades, and I so benefit personally from these remarkable interviews with people from all walks of life: CEOs, entrepreneurs, leaders at all levels, athletes, academicians, researchers, and scientists, people with side hustles, people that are creating something interesting that may be cutting edge. In some cases, these interviews feature people that may be a celebrity or a household name, and sometimes not. People that perhaps through no fault of their own had some crushing setback or trauma and lived and summoned the courage to not just talk about it, but teach through it. This podcast is, although a leadership podcast, we touch on things like how to build a great culture, how to manage your career, how to develop a personal brand, how to define, uncover, discover your purpose, which is the theme of today's episode. Our guest today is Davin Salvagno. He is the author of the newly released book, Thieves of Purpose. He's a well-known speaker, coach, advisor, podcast host, and now 2-time author, and the executive producer and co-founder of the annual Purpose Summit. His book's title, The Thief of Purpose: Overcoming the 12 Mindsets Robbing You of Your Potential. Who doesn't need to read this book? Davin, welcome to On Leadership.
Scott, it is an honor to be here. I am so excited for our conversation today. Thank you for the invitation to be on.
The honor is mine. I've been a big fan and follower of yours on social media for many years. I have followed the Purpose Summit, have been privileged to attend on several occasions. This happens every year in Charlotte, North Carolina. We'll talk more about that in a couple of moments. In fact, let's start there, because this is a collection, a magnet for quality people who are discovering their purpose, who are refining their purpose, who are helping others learn what is their purpose. At my invitation, talk a little bit about where, when, how, and why, all things related to the annual Purpose Summit.
Absolutely. And that's exactly right, Scott. The Purpose Summit is really a curation of purpose leaders, organizational, individual. There's people from for-profit sector, nonprofit sector, philanthropists, thought leaders, authors like yourself who have spoken multiple times at the summit. And it really is this gathering of being able to approach the conversations of individual purpose and organizational purpose and talk about how we're stepping into those invitations. And most recently, what's getting in the way, which was the premise of this book. But it is 3 days of insight, inspiration, collaboration with some of the most amazing people that I've had the privilege of meeting across the world. And this is our 6th year, and I'm very grateful that we get to continue to do it.
Congratulations. Let's see, Charlotte, North Carolina. What are the dates, and how does someone learn more about it?
So Purpose Summit 2025 will be May 12th through the 15th in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you can learn more about that at thepurposesummit.com.
It is a magnet for anybody that is interested in clarifying their organization's purpose, helping align their recruiting processes, their training and development processes. Highly recommend it, and you will meet the best people in the nation at this summit. Okay, let's talk about your latest passion project. You have just released a new book called The Thieves of Purpose: Overcoming the 12 Mindsets Robbing You of Your Potential. I'm going to pick 2 or 3 of these today and have you riff on them. But first, indulge me, the audience. I'm going to walk you through what, in fact, are the 12 mindsets robbing you of your potential. In order, the author tells us they are, to no surprise, first, comparison, competition, impatience, distraction, excuses, fear, lies, guilt, quitting, success, we'll go deep on that one, indifference, and unbelief. You know, when I opened the book and first started reading it, there's a couple of lines that actually stood out to me that I actually want to read real quick. One of them in the first chapter around this thief of purpose called Comparison, you talk about joy is often the evidence of purpose being present in our lives. If there was ever a value statement, if you will, a value proposition for having purpose, that was it. Joy is often the evidence of purpose being present in our lives. You have a point of view around how we get our purpose, how we give our purpose. Riff a little bit on why you're so passionate about this, why you wrote about it.
Absolutely. Purpose is essential to understanding who we are and what were we created for. And one of my favorite quotes that I shared in there is that we don't get our purpose from the world. We give our purpose to the world. It is the unique set of gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets, insights, experiences, everything that we have in our head and in our hearts that we can give or offer or contribute to a moment where other people are present. I heard a quote that's not in the book that talked about purpose this way, that purpose is where our great passions and the world's greatest pains meet. And the reality is that there are needs and pains all around us. And when we step into those opportunities to use what we have and what we've been given to positively impact the lives of others, we experience a joy that cannot be found in anything else that we can either buy or find in this world. And so that is why I share that joy is the great evidence of us operating or stepping into our purpose.
Davin, I love that your first one is comparison. I guess that wasn't by mistake, because it's, I think, what we most think of when we think of our purpose is how often we are in comparison. But not all comparison is bad. And you talk about how there are sort of styles of comparison. We have reasons to compare downward, reasons to compare upward, reasons to compare lateral. Your book is riddled with different types of research studies and documentation. Talk a little bit about the different types of comparison and how they can be both dangerous and beneficial depending upon our mindset.
Well, one of my favorite quotes, Scott, used to be comparison is the thief of joy, which was attributed to Teddy Roosevelt. And I used to say that all the time because I found it to be true in my life. And then at one point, I started to actually dissect that quote and say, well, is it really? And the reason why is because I had gone on a missions trip to Guatemala and I met some amazing people who were living in a tin shack with a dirt floor, and their mattress was on the floor and their table was a box. And I was there with a bunch of friends, and we were there for a week, and we were building a school, and we got to stay with them and eat with them and talk with them. And they were some of the most joyous people that I had ever met in my entire life. And I found myself experiencing a level of joy that I had not experienced, quite frankly, in my entire life. And what I realized was I had started to compare myself in ways that we typically don't compare ourselves. We typically compare ourselves to those who have more, or who have achieved more, who have accomplished more, or have things that we don't have. And so then what happens is we experience envy in doing so. And that is the real thief of joy. Comparison in the form of envy is the thief of joy. But when we start to compare ourselves with those who maybe have less, or those who are in less fortunate situations, or who have needs that we can potentially step into and contribute to, we can find that comparison is actually an invitation to step into our purpose. And then when we do so, we experience gratitude and joy. And so what I often tell people is, if you find yourself caught in kind of the game of comparison, what are you experiencing? Are you experiencing envy? And if you are, pause and immediately write down 3 things that you're grateful for. And in doing so, you will experience a tremendous perspective shift, and comparison will all of a sudden thrust you into maybe an awareness of situations that maybe you can step into that are an invitation to activate your purpose.
Very clear why you are the expert on this topic and wrote this book. Quick sidebar. You write about social media in this chapter in the beginning of the book, and I followed you on social media. It's how I discovered you. Yours, like mine, is very positive, as you would expect. you and I cannot be considered a troll by anyone. Notice how it's always everybody else is the troll. No one ever acknowledges to being the troll on social media. But I can't quote it exactly, but in your book you talk about how the vast majority of your business opportunities, your network has grown from social media. We know that social media gets a pretty bad rap for people that forget that their job is to pollinate and to be an energy infuser, and our courage all exponentiates when we get on social media. But social media can also be one of the worst places for comparisons. You do a very nice job in the book about talking around and at how to manage social media and its benefit to you, but it's also detriment to robbing or stealing or thieving your purpose. Any insights? You and I both have tween and teen children, and we're working with phones and social media. Where's your sweet spot to where social media fits into not falling into one of the thieves, but also helping us to refine and give our purpose to the world?
Well, I think it's exactly what you just said. How do we give our purpose to the world? So the master way to manage social media is by focusing on what you have to contribute and not what you have to gain. And we can often find ourselves in the comparison trap because, I can look at Scott Jeffrey Miller, who's written 8 best-selling books, and say, well,
Hello.
my gosh, he's written 8 best-selling books. I can't possibly, become an 8-time best-selling author. Or I can compare myself to, a Marshall Goldsmith who has 1 million followers, or, a Brené Brown or a Simon Sinek, and the list goes on. And I can look at my, measly 20-some thousand followers and sit here and say, well, what's the point? Why should I even bother being on this platform if I'm not going to be as amplified or at the status of some of these other people that I'm comparing myself to? And in doing so, then what might happen is I might step away from contributing something of value to those who may actually see it and benefit from it, because we get caught up in quantity versus quality. And we then don't step into these opportunities because we are lowering ourselves based off of who we're comparing ourselves to. In fact, one of the things I love to share, we joked about this, Scott, is that my very first book, which was self-published, right, is a very, very thin book. And I used to be embarrassed sometimes that it was on the bookshelf behind me because you couldn't even see the spine of it. You couldn't read the title of it. And I didn't want to write another book because I started to question, I'm not really an author. I mean, look at all of these other amazing authors and all of these other books. And so why even bother? And of course, I talk about in the book, in the introduction, why I ended up writing The Thieves of Purpose, which you were a significant part of. But had I listened to that voice, had I listened to that voice of comparison in the way that I was comparing, I may not have stepped into it. And I think when it comes to social media, we do the same things. We all have something to say. We all have something to contribute. And if we allow ourselves to compare ourselves or get lost in that game and focus on what do I have to gain, or how do I make this about me, rather than how do I offer something that might be of value to others, we can rob ourselves of using social media in a very purposeful and very impactful way.
We could do a whole session, could we not, on how to leverage social media for joy and purpose and kindness, but also to progress agendas and a business development tool. I think we all fall into the trap of seeing someone post something that is incongruent with what we think should happen or what group should be in charge, and we stoop sometimes to our immediate response, and I always count to 10 before I ever decide to post on something. And I don't delete or unfriend people who are different than I am. Otherwise, I'll just be, speaking in an echo chamber. A lot of great...
That's a good rule. It's a good rule.
A lot of great thoughts to talk about on how to make that a tool for good, not for bad. Okay, thief number 4, you call distraction. Hello. And you got a quote in the book that you quote Bob Goff. You say, distraction robs us of the ability to both live in the moment and discern what lasts. I've talked a lot about how, I don't live in the past. I live in the future, which is why I don't live in the present. As the sole economic provider for our family, I take maybe too much value, too much purpose, quite frankly, in providing for my family. So I'm always thinking about the next book, the next keynote, the next client, and that's the responsibility coming out of me, but that robs me of living in the present. It is a great manifestation of your 4th thief of distraction. Riff on this and tell us something new or interesting you want us to think about around our own propensity to be distracted.
Well, we live in the most distracting time ever. And we just talked about social media. Nothing is probably more distracting than social media. It is incredibly hard to be fully present in the moments that we're in, but purpose lives in the moments that we're in. There's nothing wrong with looking at the future and being proactive and goal setting and being a visionary and saying, here is how I'm going to provide for my family, or how we're going to grow our business, or how we're going to, gain market share. All of those different things, all of that is very, very important. But often our purpose is staring us right in the face, and we miss it because we are so focused on what we need to do rather than on who we need to be. I've been incredibly guilty of this as a husband, as a father, as a leader, where my mind was focused on something that I needed to get done, or where I needed to go, or where I needed to be. And there was a need that was right in front of me that I was missing because I wasn't present. And that is why distraction can be such a tremendous thief of purpose, because it's constantly focusing our eyes or our thoughts on something that maybe isn't as urgent or as important that the thing is right in front of us. And if we're not present, we won't see it. And, one of the things that we can also have is competing purposes in the moment. So, okay, yes, I need to do this for Amy, or I need to do this for Bennett or Vera, who are my kids, or I need to answer this phone call, or we can have competing purposes in the moment. And one of the things that I learned from my dear friend, Dr. Amber Selking, who MCs the Purpose Summit with me, who wrote an amazing book called Winning the Mental Game. She has an acronym called WIN, how you win the moment. And it's what's important now. And that has helped me tremendously in the moment when I find myself being distracted by multiple purposes that maybe are all important, to ask which of those is the most important right now that I need to step into. But if we're not present in the moment, we won't be aware of what those opportunities are.
Davin, you are a recognized expert on purpose. You co-founded and produced the Purpose Summit. You've written a book now on thieves of purpose. No one is disputing your research and time and passion for this topic. Take it down a couple thousand feet for me. Practically, how does someone uncover their purpose? I'll tell you, you invited me to the Purpose Summit once many years ago. I gave probably a mediocre speech on leadership, and during it, I kind of confessed, I don't know what my purpose is. I'm 56 years old. Then I was probably 52, and I can't tell you my purpose. I can tell you my roles. I can tell you my obligations. I can tell you my commitments and responsibilities. I have no idea what my purpose is. I'm a man of faith. I'm a man of fear. I have a big ego, but a healthy dose of self-awareness. How does someone uncover their purpose? Because I don't think the vast majority of us know what our purpose is.
Well, it's a very intimidating question for many people, which is why they don't know. Purpose is big. It's huge. And in many ways, it's the question that's been asked since the beginning of time. What's the meaning of life? Why am I here? What is my value? We have friends of ours that talk about the dash, the poem that I reference in the book, in between the year that we're here and the year that we leave. What does that dash represent? What is the purpose of all of this? That is a big question. It's perhaps life's biggest question, which is why many people avoid it, because it's so big and so intimidating. And we could offer, I too am a person of faith. We could offer that there's a grandiose purpose for our lives spiritually, and there is. But on a more practical level, purpose is not singular and grandiose. Purpose is plural and it's momentary. I have multiple purposes. I have a purpose as a husband. I have a purpose as a father. I have a purpose as a speaker. I have a purpose as an author. I have a purpose as the producer of the summit. I have a purpose as a business leader, as a worship leader, as a musician. There's so many different purposes that I have been invited to step into that are gifts and opportunities that have been given. So first step to finding purpose is, first of all, not making it so grandiose, not making it so big, dialing it down and recognizing that there are multiple purposes at multiple moments and that it lives in the present. The easiest way to think about this is to think about taking inventory of who you are and what you have to offer. What are your gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets, insights, experiences, everything that you have to be able to offer to those around you to impact them in some way. If you or I were to go to our bathroom or to our kitchen and pull a product out from the cupboard and look at the back of it, the word purpose would be on it, and there would be an active ingredient, and it would tell you what that active ingredient does. In the same, and what's happening in the moment dictates what product that you need to use. The circumstances of the environment that are around you dictate which product that you need to use to activate the purpose that that product exists for. We are no different. We find ourselves in different environments in every moment of every day, and we have an entire inventory of ingredients that are inside of us that we can choose to activate in those moments to contribute to those moments, depending on what the need is. So to make it very, very simply, what is it that you're good at? What is it that you're great at? What are your gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets that you have? And how are you leveraging them in the moment to make a difference or make an impact? That is where purpose begins.
Davin, I sometimes lose track of the gravity that has come with the privilege of hosting this podcast, right? Close to 600 interviews, either taped, released, or planning to release, and therefore, typically 600 books that I've been able to consume. One of my favorite interviews was with Marcus Buckingham. People know him, of course, as the PhD researcher at Gallup for many years, who co-authored the whole strengths movement with Don Clifton, went on to form the Marcus Buckingham Companies, and has written prolifically about purpose and joy and love and work. And one of the things that Marcus taught me that haunts me is most of us do what we're good at, not what we love. Oftentimes accountants become accountants because they're good at math, or lawyers become lawyers because they're great at arguing, or whatever it is. Lawyers do more than arguing, of course. But this kind of haunts me, is that in our careers, many of us end up falling into careers because we're good at something. We're good at analytics or calculation or organization, but what you are good at may not be what brings you joy, what brings you happy, what helps to clarify your purpose. One of the parts of your book I like the most is you do a lot of crossover work into careers and professions, and how do we do our best to align more our careers, where we spend so much time, with our purposes. The rare few of us get to do the same thing at the same time, right? Live our purpose and thrive in our careers. But for those of you who are thinking about lessening the dissonance, if you will, between your purpose and your career, I highly recommend this book. I want to get to one more of these thieves to our audience. Indulge me as I read them again. Comparison, competition, impatience, distraction, excuses, fear, lies, guilt, quitting, success, indifference, and unbelief. Let's spend the rest of our time talking about success. Because how in the hell is success a thief of purpose? But I'm guessing you have an answer for that.
Well, success is something that we are conditioned for, but not created for. We're conditioned. Everything around us says achieve, achieve, achieve. Get more, get more, get more. Outdo the next person behind you. If you've got this many followers, get this many followers. If you've got this kind of house, get this kind of house. If you have one house, get two houses. The world is constantly conditioning us for success. But I read an amazing book that changed my life exactly when I needed to read it. I was in the middle of my professional career. I was being groomed for a C-level role with a Fortune 8 company. At the height of my career, I was making very good compensation. We were living very well. So by the world's standards, I was living a successful life. But I was incredibly unfulfilled. I was one of those people, Scott, that you just talked about, that I was doing that I was great at, but I wasn't fulfilled. I didn't find myself operating in my purpose because I was chasing success. But we're created for significance. And the book that I read, called Halftime by Bob Buford, upended my world. This is where I got the concept that, hey, we're conditioned for success, but we're created for significance. And so what happens is when we recognize that what we do has meaning and impact, and we can tie what we do to that meaning and impact, all of a sudden, we now experience significance. And the two things are not at odds with each other. In fact, Buford would offer that you could live a highly successful life and miss out on a life of significance, but it's impossible to live a life of significance and not be successful. And so the gap, the way that you close those two things, is to connect what it is that you do, what it is that you are great at, to the impact that it has. And the reason that most people are unfulfilled is because they don't have sight of that. Gallup just came out again with a poll that, we're at a 10-year low in employee engagement, which is mind-blowing when you consider how many different books and talks have been given on the concept of driving employee engagement in the workforce. And the answer is really, really simple. And I didn't come up with this. Simon Sinek talked about start with why years ago, but why has been a question that's been around for a very long time. It's a very simple concept. When you can connect what people do to why they do it, and they understand why it's so important, and it makes a difference, they find fulfillment. And that's the bridge from success to significance. And that's what most people are missing. And so the reason that success by itself is a thief is because that is what we are most often focused on. And we end up sacrificing a life of significance solely in the pursuit of success when we can have both.
Really, your book is phenomenal. Some books sell 10,000 copies, some sell 10 million copies, some sell tens of copies. Regardless of how many copies of your book you sell, which I'm sure will be on the upper end, because I think people are searching for purpose like never before, and perhaps our generation, your book is going to touch lives in a way that you'll never know. So don't look at your book sales ever as a barometer of your influence and impact, because you're going to change a lot of lives that you'll never know about. I leave our listeners and viewers today with, again, what might be my favorite line in the whole book. Joy is often the evidence of purpose being present in our lives. Davin Salvagno, the co-founder and executive producer of the annual Purpose Summit in Charlotte, North Carolina. You are also a common keynoter, coach, and podcast host, and the author of the recently released book, Thieves of Purpose, Overcoming the 12 Mindsets Robbing You of Your Potential. Thanks for joining us today, Davin. You're a class act.
Thank you, Scott. Truly my pleasure.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.